Everybody knows Motown, Diana Ross, The Temptations, Marvin Gaye, polished, packaged, engineered for crossover success. But in a converted movie theater on McLemore Avenue in Memphis, Tennessee, something rawer, wilder, and arguably more powerful was happening at the exact same time. Stax Records. No carpets, no pop formula, just wood floors, gospel fire, and one of the greatest house bands ever assembled under one roof.
Baby, oh baby, I love...
While the world watched Motown, Stax was making records that shook the walls. Today we're counting down 10 Stax artists who should have been every bit as famous as the Motown superstars, and the real stories behind the songs that prove exactly why. Number 10, William Bell, You Don't Miss Your Water, 1961. William Bell was born in Memphis in 1939 and grew up idolizing Sam Cooke, Frank Sinatra, and Nat King Cole all at once. He wrote his first song at 10 years old, won a talent contest at 14, and in 1961 became the very first male solo artist ever signed to Stax Records.
I couldn't see.
The song that launched him was never supposed to be released. He was touring New York that summer with the Phineas Newborn Orchestra. 6 weeks away from Memphis, missing his girlfriend, sitting alone in a hotel room during a thunderstorm. He told Uncut magazine, "I was just feeling melancholy, missing my home, missing my girl, and it just came to mind." He recorded it thinking it was a demo. Stax buried it as the B-side to a song called Formula of Love, but radio DJs flipped the record over immediately because the B-side was too good to ignore. Soul historian Peter Guralnick called Bell perhaps the most underrated of all Stax artists. Otis Redding covered it in 1965. The Byrds covered it in 1968. Peter Tosh, Brian Eno, and Bruce Springsteen all covered it. The Recording Academy inducted it into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 2024.
Now I sit and wonder.
And in 2017, William Bell won a Grammy for Best Americana Album at 77 years old. The man who built the foundation that everyone else stood on, he got his flowers just 6 decades late.
But
Number 9, The Bar-Kays, Soul Finger, 1967. The Bar-Kays were teenagers when their debut single, Soul Finger, cracked the Billboard Top 20 in 1967. The oldest member of the band was barely 19. They formed at Booker T. Washington High School in Memphis and eventually became Otis Redding's touring backing band. Redding made special arrangements with their parents, even buying a bigger plane, as his widow Zelma later confirmed, specifically so he could fly the boys home Sunday night in time for Monday morning class. The story of Soul Finger is pure Stax magic. The session was booked to record a completely different song, but Jim Stewart stepped out of the room. The teenagers started jamming, and producer David Porter walked by, heard it happening, brought neighborhood kids in to shout "Soul Finger" in the background, and captured the whole thing live. It reached number 17 on the Hot 100 and number 3 on the R&B chart. Then on December 10th, 1967, 6 months after that record dropped, Otis Redding's plane crashed into Lake Monona near Madison, Wisconsin. 4 of the 6 Bar-Kays were on that plane: Jimmy King, Ronnie Caldwell, Phelan Jones, and Carl Cunningham, none of them over 19, died in those freezing waters. Bassist James Alexander survived because the plane was full. Trumpeter Ben Cawley survived by clinging to a seat cushion, despite not knowing how to swim. 2 survivors, a demolished band, and somehow they came back.
Listen, 90% of you watching right now aren't subscribed yet. If these stories are blowing your mind, imagine what you're missing. Hit subscribe, turn on that bell, and join the 200,000 R&B fans who never miss a Groove Lens upload.
Number 8, Eddie Floyd, Knock on Wood, 1966. Eddie Floyd was not supposed to be the one who sang this song. Born in Montgomery, Alabama in 1937, he co-founded the Falcons alongside a young Wilson Pickett. Then came to Stax as a songwriter, quietly writing hits for Carla Thomas and Wilson Pickett while staying completely out of the spotlight. In the summer of 1966, he and Stax guitarist Steve Cropper checked into the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, the same building where Martin Luther King Jr. would be assassinated 2 years later, and began writing a song originally intended for Otis Redding. A summer thunderstorm made the song. Floyd told Cropper about hiding under the bed with his brother during Alabama lightning storms as a child. Cropper looked up and said, "That's it. It's like thunder, lightning. The way you love me is frightening." They called trumpet player Wayne Jackson at 2 in the morning. He drove over from West Memphis, wrote the horn lines by 3 a.m., and they recorded the whole thing the next morning. Stax boss Jim Stewart didn't want to release it. He thought it sounded too close to In the Midnight Hour. Al Bell personally drove it to radio stations in Baltimore and D.C. and worked the record for 2 solid weeks. Knock on Wood hit number 1 on the R&B chart and went gold. David Bowie performed it live on his 1974 Diamond Dogs tour. Amy Stewart's disco version hit number 1 in 1979, and Ringo Starr called it his favorite song of all time at the 2011 Mojo Awards. Number 7, Carla Thomas, B-A-B-Y, 1966.
Baby, oh baby.
Without Carla Thomas, there is no Stax Records. That is not an exaggeration. Born in Memphis in 1942 and the daughter of Rufus Thomas,
You make wrong things right.
she grew up walking distance from Beale Street, performing on WDIA, radio's Teen Town Singers, at age 10, even though the minimum age requirement was 14.
You look so good to me, baby.
At 16, she wrote a love poem she called Gee Whiz and played it on the family piano. Her father brought her to the brand new Satellite record studio in 1960 for his own session, and she sat quietly in the corner. Co-founder Jim Stewart noticed her and asked Rufus if she had anything. Gee Whiz became a top 10 pop hit and a top 5 R&B hit in 1961. The royalties from that single were the financial foundation on which Stax built everything else. Atlantic Records' Jerry Wexler heard it, flew to Memphis, and signed the distribution deal that put Stax on the national map. All of it because a 16-year-old girl wrote a poem about a boy. In 1966, Isaac Hayes and David Porter brought her B.A.B.Y. It reached number 2 on the R&B chart and number 14 on the pop chart. She was the only female artist at Stax to release full-length albums. Her songs charted nationally more than 20 times. She received 2 Grammy nominations in 1967. Aretha Franklin and Gladys Knight have both cited her as an influence. Carla Thomas is still alive, still living in Memphis. History calls her the Queen of Memphis Soul. That title should have been universal.
I love for you to call me baby.
Number 6, The Dramatics. What you see is what you get. 1971. The Dramatics were from Detroit. And in Detroit, in the 1960s, if you were a harmonizing soul vocal group, you lived in the shadow of Motown. For years, the Dramatics knocked on every door they could find. Wingate Records, Sport Records, Stax's Volt subsidiary in 1969, and got absolutely nowhere. Their first Volt single was a complete commercial failure. Producer Don Davis, who had championed them, nearly walked away. For 2 full years, they sat in musical limbo, too good to quit, not finding the break. Then songwriter Tony Hester saw them in a Detroit nightclub in 1971 and offered them a song he'd been holding back. He was convinced the Dramatics were the only group alive who could bring it to life. What you see is what you get, lifted from comedian Flip Wilson's famous catchphrase, was built entirely around the group's greatest asset. 5 completely distinct lead voices. Ron Banks's soaring falsetto, Willie Ford's deep bass, simply saying, "Look at me," the scatting, the 5-part interplay. Nothing on radio sounded like it. The song peaked at number 3 on the R&B chart and broke into the Hot 100 Top 10 at number 9, going gold. Their follow-up, In the Rain, hit number 1 on the R&B chart and number 5 on the pop chart in 1972. Catherine Bigelow featured them in her 2017 Academy Award-nominated film, Detroit. They were inducted into the R&B Music Hall of Fame in 2013. 5 voices from Detroit that Motown somehow completely missed. Number 5, Johnny Taylor, Who's Making Love, 1968. The man Stax nicknamed the Philosopher of Soul arrived at the label carrying one of the most extraordinary backstories in American music. Born in Crawfordsville, Arkansas in 1934, Johnny Taylor grew up singing gospel, and by 1957, Sam Cooke was his close personal friend. When Cooke left the Soul Stirrers to pursue a pop career, Taylor was chosen to replace him on lead vocals. The man who replaced Sam Cooke. After Cooke's murder in December 1964, Taylor's label dissolved and he landed at Stax in 1966. But Stax decided to market him as a blues singer. completely ignoring his extraordinary gospel background and his direct connection to the most beloved pop vocalist of the era. 2 years of moderate R&B hits and no mainstream breakthrough. Then in 1968, Detroit producer Don Davis pushed him harder and funkier than anyone had dared. The result was Who's Making Love? A sly, unapologetically provocative question aimed at any man who thought stepping out carried no consequences. It hit at the exact right moment. Stax had just lost its entire back catalog to Atlantic in a catastrophic contractual dispute. Otis Redding had been dead 8 months. The label was in freefall. Johnny Taylor walked in and handed them their biggest single to date, #1 on the R&B chart, #5 on the Hot 100, over 1 million copies sold, his first Grammy nomination. He later scored the first ever platinum certified single in history with Disco Lady in 1976 and was inducted into the Blues Hall of Fame in 2022. #4, Albert King, Born Under a Bad Sign, 1967.
Been down since I began to crawl.
Albert King was 43 years old when he walked into Stax Records. One of 13 children, he grew up picking cotton in Arkansas.
Hard luck and trouble.
Built his first guitar from a cigar box and a tree branch, and spent decades grinding through the Chitlin circuit while working day jobs on the side.
I've been down since I began to crawl.
Stax co-founder Estelle Axton recruited him after he walked into her record shop next door to the studio. William Bell and Booker T. Jones wrote Born Under a Bad Sign, specifically for him. Bell explained, astrology was pretty big then. I had this idea in the back of my mind. I got to thinking it might work.
If it wasn't for bad luck, I would now no longer.
Jones built a rolling, menacing bass line around an unconventional 10-bar structure, breaking the standard 12-bar blues template entirely. King recorded it with the full Stax house band, Cropper, Duck Dunn, Al Jackson Jr., Isaac Hayes, and the Memphis Horns. Trumpeter Wayne Jackson recalled, Albert's guitar was always out of tune with everything else, but he was such a strong man, he would just bend the notes back in. The album was released in August 1967 and failed to chart. But Eric Clapton heard it and told every journalist who would listen that Albert King had completely changed how he played guitar. Cream covered the title track on Wheels of Fire, which hit #1 in America. Jimi Hendrix covered it. Stevie Ray Vaughan covered it. Led Zeppelin took riffs from The Hunter for their debut album without credit. The album is now in the Grammy Hall of Fame, the Blues Foundation Hall of Fame, and the National Recording Registry. #3, The Staple Singers, I'll Take You There, 1972.
I know a place.
The Staples Singers started in a church in Chicago. A father named Pop Staples and his children making gospel so raw that Bob Dylan said hearing Mavis at 13 was the most mysterious thing I'd ever heard. When Dr. Martin Luther King attended one of their concerts in 1963, the family walked up to him afterward. As Mavis has told it, if he can preach it, we can sing it. They signed to Stax in 1968 and began recording message music. Then in early 1972, Stax co-owner Al Bell sat in his father's backyard in Little Rock, Arkansas, just days after burying his younger brother who had been shot and killed. He sat on the hood of a broken-down school bus in the yard, and in that raw grief, words came. I know a place, ain't nobody worried, ain't nobody crying, ain't no smiling faces lying to the races. He brought the song to Mavis. At first, she couldn't connect with it. Bell stood in the studio and sang it himself to the musicians, trying to convey the feeling. Slowly, the Muscle Shoals rhythm section locked into a rolling two-chord groove, and Mavis began to feel it.
All right.
The guitar solo everyone thinks is pop staples was actually played by session guitarist Eddie Hinton, who idolized Pops and tried to sound exactly like him. When Mavis calls out Daddy Now, the man playing was someone else entirely. I'll Take You There hit #1 on both the Hot 100 and the R&B chart. Salt and Pepper sampled it in Let's Talk About Sex. It ranks number 276 on Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Songs of All Time. Number 2, Sam and Dave, Soul Man, 1967. Sam Moore and Dave Prater both grew up singing gospel and first performed together at a Miami club in 1961. Atlantic Records signed them in 1964 and immediately sent them to Memphis to work with Stax. There they were paired with two young staff writers named Isaac Hayes and David Porter. In July 1967, Hayes was watching television coverage of the 12th Street riot in Detroit. Buildings were burning, and he noticed something. The businesses that survived, mostly black-owned, had been marked with a single word painted on the door: soul. Hayes connected it immediately to the story of Passover in the Bible, a word that kept destruction from the threshold. He called Porter. Together they wrote Soul Man in one session. A protagonist who had come from nothing, survived everything, and was still standing. Steve Cropper showed up the night before the recording and sat with Hayes at the piano looking for an intro. Cropper came up with the famous sliding guitar lick using a Zippo lighter dragged across the strings. During the actual session, Sam Moore spontaneously shouted, "Play it, Steve!" and it stayed on the final record. Soul Man hit #1 on the R&B chart and peaked at #2 on the Hot 100, blocked from the top only by Lulu's To Sir With Love. It won the 1968 Grammy for Best R&B Group Performance. In 2019, the Library of Congress selected it for the National Recording Registry. The Blues Brothers made it their debut single in 1979. Born from a Detroit riot and a Bible story about protection. #1, O.V. Wright, 8 Men, 4 Women, 1967. O.V. Wright is the greatest soul singer most people have never heard of.
Of loving you.
Born Overton Vertus Wright in Lano, Tennessee in 1939, he sang in church as a child and developed a voice so deep and emotionally devastating that soul scholars have placed him alongside Otis Redding and Sam Cooke at the absolute peak of the art form.
I dream.
In 1964, songwriter Roosevelt Jameson brought a demo tape featuring Wright's voice to Jim Stewart at Stax. On that tape was a ballad called "That's How Strong My Love Is." Stewart listened and turned it down flat. He called it too gospel, too raw. Jameson drove in the middle of the night to the home of Quentin Claunch, co-founder of Tiny Goldwax Records, rang the doorbell and played the tape. Claunch was blown away. Within a week, Wright was in the studio.
Because in my heart I knew.
The recording outsold, according to Peter Guralnick's Sweet Soul Music, even the Otis Redding cover that Stax rushed out in response. The Rolling Stones covered it for their second album. Jim Croce covered it. Rod Stewart covered it. Wright went on to record some of the most brutally honest deep soul ever put to tape.
I knew they said that.
8 men, 4 women, a dream sequence about a jury of love, climbed to number 4 on the R&B chart in 1967. The Wu-Tang Clan sampled him repeatedly. Ghostface Killah, RZA, and GZA have all publicly cited him.
Yeah, when he asked you, my love.
O.V. Wright died in 1980 at 41 years old, broke, never having broken through nationally. Jim Stewart turned down that tape in 1964. That single decision may be the greatest missed opportunity in the entire history of Stax Records. From William Bell writing in a New York hotel room during a thunderstorm, to teenage boys in Memphis recording the funkiest jam of their lives before tragedy took half of them, to Mavis Staples channeling a brother's murder into a song a whole nation needed, Stax was never just a record label. It was a community, a sound built by people who had everything to say. Motown had the machine, Stax had the soul. And the artists on this countdown remind us that greatness doesn't always get its due in the moment. Sometimes you have to go looking for it. If this video sent you down a Stax rabbit hole tonight, good. That was the whole point. Like, subscribe and drop a comment. Which Stax artist do you think the world still hasn't given enough credit? Thanks for watching.